Children of the Black Goat. Chapter 2, The Path of Thorns. The map Cale had drawn was not a map in the scholar's sense. It was a desperate scrawl of charcoal on a rag, lacking scale or precision. It did not mention that the path through the cliffs was a goat trail winding up the spine of the Serpent's Back Mountains, where the air grew thin and the wind sharpened its teeth on the rocks. 3 days had passed since they left the ruined chapel. 3 days of climbing into the gray belly of the sky. The rain of the lowlands had turned into sleet, and now, as they breached the timberline, into snow. It wasn't the soft, picturesque snow of fairy tales. It was hard, granular ice that stung the skin like sand thrown by a giant. Silas walked with his head bowed against the gale. His beard was frosted white, making him look like an ancient mountain spirit carved from granite. His knee, the old war-wound, was burning with a fierce, hot pain that contrasted with the freezing cold. "Up," Silas grunted, reaching back. Elin didn't answer. She couldn't. Her small hand, wrapped in layers of rags, gripped his calloused fingers. She was stumbling. The snow was up to her shins, dragging at her ragged boots with every step. Silas stopped. He looked back. The girl's face was pale, her lips a dangerous shade of violet. The spark in her black eyes was dimming, retreating behind a haze of exhaustion. "We stop," Silas decided, his voice barely audible over the wind's howl. "No," Elin chattered, shaking her head weakly. "Brother Cale said, the outpost is close." "Cale is a farm boy who probably never climbed higher than a haystack," Silas snapped, though he kept his tone low to avoid triggering an avalanche. "If we keep walking, you'll freeze and I'll have to carry a corpse. I don't get paid for corpses." He scanned the cliff face. To his left, a sheer drop into a foggy abyss. To his right, a wall of jagged stone. But there, half hidden behind a boulder shaped like a cracked skull, was a fissure. A dark slit in the rock face. "There," Silas pointed. He didn't wait for her to argue. He scooped Elin up. She was frighteningly light, a bundle of bird bones and wet wool. He carried her toward the fissure, his boots crunching heavily on the ice. The fissure opened into a shallow cave, barely deep enough for 2 people, but it was out of the wind. The floor was dry dust and old animal droppings. Silas set Elin down. She immediately curled into a ball, shivering so violently it looked like a seizure. "Don't sleep," Silas ordered, slapping her cheeks lightly. "If you sleep now, you won't wake up. Talk to me." "Cold?" Elin whispered. Silas cursed. He had no wood, no tinder. The mountain was bare rock. He looked at his pack. He had a spare shirt, some dried meat, and the map. He took the map, the precious rag that was their only guide. He looked at it for a second, then crumpled it up. "What are you doing?" Elin's eyes widened. "Making heat," Silas muttered. He placed the crumpled cloth on the stone floor. He took out his flint and steel. He struck it. Once, twice. A spark caught the dry fabric. The charcoal drawing of their salvation curled and blackened, bursting into a small yellow flame. Silas fed the fire with his spare shirt, tearing it into strips. It wasn't much, but it was fire. He pulled Elin close to the tiny flame, wrapping his massive fur cloak around both of them, creating a cocoon of body heat. "Warm your hands," he commanded. Elin held her hands out. The fire reflected in her pitch-black eyes, dancing like trapped spirits. "You burned the map," she said softly. "Now we're lost." "We were already lost, kid," Silas grunted, rubbing his aching knee. "Maps are for people who know where they're going. We're just running away." "Is that what you did before?" Elin asked. "Run away." Silas looked at the dying flame. The question dug deeper than the cold. "I was a soldier," Silas said, his voice rough. "Soldiers don't run. We advance. Sometimes to the front, sometimes to the rear. But we never run." "Then why are you sad?" Silas looked at her. Her perception was unnerving. She saw things without looking. "I'm not sad. I'm cold. And I'm old." "My mother said," Elin whispered, leaning her head against his chest, listening to the slow thump of his heart, "that sadness is just love with nowhere to go." Silas stiffened. Love with nowhere to go. The memory hit him like a physical blow. A small house in the valley. A woman with hair like wheat. A cradle that stopped rocking 10 years ago when the plague swept through the southern kingdoms. He had burned that house. He had buried them. And then he had picked up his sword and walked away, turning his heart into a stone so it wouldn't bleed anymore. "Your mother talked too much," Silas said, his voice thick. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small silver flask. It was empty, but he held it like a talisman. Sleep now, he said, softer this time. I'll watch the fire. The fire died 10 minutes later. But the heat remained, trapped under the fur cloak, shared between the old killer and the cursed child. Silas woke with a start. It wasn't a sound that woke him. It was a smell. Smoke. Not the smoke of his burning shirt. What smoke? Pine and sage. He sat up, hand instantly on his dagger. The storm outside had broken. The sky was a bruised purple of twilight. And drifting past the mouth of their cave was a thin gray ribbon of smoke. Elin, he shook her. Move. They crept out of the fissure. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence over the mountains. Silas followed the smoke. They rounded the skull rock, and looked down into a small depression in the mountain flank, a bowl hidden from the main path. There was a hut. It was built of rough-hewn stone and timber with a roof of slate. A chimney puffed contentedly. And in front of the hut, a figure was chopping wood. It was an old man. He was huge, taller even than Silas, but bent with age. He wore a tunic made of stitched wolf skins. His axe was a woodcutter's tool, but he swung it with the rhythmic precision of a headsman. Whack, crack. Stay behind me, Silas whispered to Elin. He stepped into the clearing, hands visible but loose, ready to draw steel. Hail, Silas called out. The word hung in the frozen air. The old man didn't flinch. He finished his swing, splitting a log cleanly in two. Then slowly he turned. One side of his face was a ruin of scar tissue, burn marks that looked decades old. His left eye was milky white, blind. But his right eye was sharp, blue, and intelligent. He looked at Silas. Then at Elin peering from behind the cloak. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't ask what they wanted. He simply rested his axe on the chopping block and pointed to the door of his hut. Stew's on, the old man said. His voice was deep, like stones rolling underground. Venison and root vegetable. Unless you prefer eating snow. Silas hesitated. A trap? A hermit in the middle of nowhere usually meant madness or danger. We have no coin, Silas warned. Did I ask for coin? The old man spat to the side. I asked if you were hungry. He turned and walked into the hut, leaving the door open. A rectangle of golden light spilled out onto the snow, inviting and terrifying. Silas looked at Elin. She nodded. He's not lying, she whispered. His heart is quiet. They went in. The interior of the hut was sparse but clean. Herbs dried in bundles from the rafters, sage, thyme, and mountain garlic. A large iron pot bubbled over the hearth. The old man, who introduced himself only as Oryn, ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. He placed them on a rough table. Eat, Oryn said. He sat in a rocking chair by the fire, picking up a piece of wood and a whittling knife. He began to carve. Silas sat, but he didn't eat immediately. He watched Oryn's hands. The knife moved with delicate grace, shaving off thin curls of wood. Those were not the hands of a peasant. They were the hands of someone who knew anatomy. You handle a knife well for a woodcutter, Silas noted, testing the waters. And you walk quietly for a pilgrim, Oryn countered without looking up. That sword at your hip drags your left leg. Old injury. Me. Silas tensed. An arrow. Long time ago. Oryn grunted. Mine was fire. Siege of Blackwater. 30 years passed. Silas lowered his spoon. The Siege of Blackwater. That was a massacre. The king's army had burned the rebel city to the ground. No prisoners. You were defending? Silas asked. I was burning, Oryn said. He stopped carving. He looked at his scarred hand. I was a sapper. My job was to set the fires. I burned the libraries, the granaries, the homes. The room went cold despite the fire. Elin stopped eating. She looked at the old man with wide eyes. You killed people? She asked. Silas kicked her foot under the table, but Oryn didn't get angry. He looked at the child. Many, Oryn admitted. Too many to count, child. Then why are you here? Elin asked. Why are you feeding us? Oryn smiled. It was a sad, crooked thing on his scarred face. Because the mountains don't care what I did, Oryn said. The snow covers everything equally. The bones of saints and the bones of sinners, they all look white in the winter. He pointed to the stew. I spent 20 years taking things from the world. Life. Homes. Now, I try to give things back. A bowl of soup. A warm fire. It doesn't balance the scales. The scales never balance. But it keeps the ghosts quiet for a while. Silas stared at the old man. He saw a mirror. A version of himself 10 years from now. Alone. Haunted. trying to buy redemption with small acts of kindness that felt insufficient. Does it work? Silas asked quietly. Does the noise stop? Oryn looked at Silas with his one good eye. A look of profound understanding passed between the two old soldiers. No, Oryn said. But the silence between the screams gets longer. Oryn stood up and went to a chest in the corner. He pulled out a pair of thick woolen socks and a small jar of salve. For the girl, he said, placing them on the table. Frostbite takes the toes first. Greasing them helps. Silas took the items. He felt a lump in his throat. Thank you, Silas said. We are heading south. To the abandoned outpost? Oryn guessed. How did you know? It's the only thing that way. Except death. Oryn went back to his chair. Be careful. The outpost isn't empty anymore. Silas gripped the table. Who's there? Not who. What? Oryn shaved a curl of wood. Something woke up in the mines beneath it. Shadows that move when there is no light. If you go there, keep your fire bright. Silas nodded. He finished his stew. It was the best thing he had tasted in years. Elin walked over to Oryn. She reached out and touched his scarred hand, the hand that had burned a city. Your hands are warm, she said simply. Oryn froze. He looked at the small, cursed child. He didn't pull away. And yours are cold, little one, he said gently. Stay by the fire. They slept on the rug before the hearth. For the first time in days, Silas slept without dreaming of burning houses. In the morning, the sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. The storm had scrubbed the world clean. They stood at the door of the hut. Oryn handed Silas a bundle of dried meat and a small bag of salt. Salt, Oryn said. Good for preserving meat. And for warding off things that shouldn't be. You're not coming? Silas asked. He found himself wanting this old man's company. My penance is here, Oryn shook his head. I keep the fire for the lost. You have your own path. And your own burden to carry. He glanced at Elin. She's not a burden, Silas said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Oryn smiled. I know. That's why you'll make it. Silas adjusted his pack. He looked at the old sapper. What you said last night, Silas said. About the scales never balancing. Maybe you're right, Silas said. But today, the scale tipped a little bit toward the light. Oryn laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Go on, you sentimental fool. Before the snow starts again. They walked away, crunching through the fresh snow. Silas didn't look back, but he knew the old man was watching until they disappeared around the bend. Uncle, Elin said, her voice muffled by the scarf Oryn had given her. What? Is Mr. Oryn a bad man? Silas looked at the path ahead. The mountains were steep and dangerous. The shadows Oryn warned about were waiting. He was, Silas said. But the man who gave us soup, he was a good man. Can you be both? We are all both, Elin, Silas sighed, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. We are all just trying to make the good part win before the end. He took her hand. Come on. Keep your eyes open. And if you see a shadow move, tell me. They marched into the blinding white of the mountain pass, leaving the warmth of the hut behind, carrying a jar of salve, a bag of salt, and a lesson about the complexity of the human soul. The abandoned outpost was not a fortress. It was a scar carved into the mountain's flank. It sat at the mouth of a massive mine shaft, a collection of rotting wooden barracks and collapsed watchtowers. Decades ago, this had been a bustling hub of the Iron Guild, where men dug deep into the earth to pull out veins of silver and ore. Now it was a graveyard of ambition. Silas and Elin stood at the edge of the perimeter. The wind here was different. It didn't howl, it moaned, whistling through the empty window frames of the barracks like breath through a flute made of bone. It's quiet, Elin whispered, clutching Silas's cloak. Too quiet, Silas replied. He drew his sword. The steel hissed against the leather scabbard, a harsh sound in the dead silence. Even the crows don't fly here. They moved through the ruins. The snow was untouched, save for their own footprints. No animals. No patrols. Just the weight of history pressing down on them. The entrance to the pass was blocked by a rockslide. A massive wall of boulders, likely triggered years ago to seal the path. Silas inspected the debris. We can't climb over. It's too unstable. He looked at the dark, gaping maw of the mine entrance nearby. A wooden sign hung askew above it, the paint long peeled away, but the symbol of the Iron Guild, a hammer and pickaxe, was still visible, burned into the wood. We have to go through, Silas said, sheathing his sword and pulling out a torch he had prepared from a pine branch and Oryn's animal fat. The mine tunnels cut through the mountain. They should come out on the other side of the slide. Mr. Oryn said there are shadows, Elin reminded him, her eyes wide and fixated on the darkness of the tunnel. Oryn is a superstitious old man, Silas lied, striking his flint. The torch sparked and roared to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the snow. And I have fire. Shadows hate fire. He took Elin's hand. Her grip was tight, her palm cold. Stay close. If you see anything, squeeze my hand. Don't scream. They stepped into the mountain. The air inside the mine was stale, tasting of copper and old dust. The temperature dropped instantly. It wasn't the biting cold of the wind, it was a still, damp chill that seeped into the lungs. The torchlight pushed back the darkness, revealing support beams of ancient oak, black with age and soot. Rusted rails ran along the floor, disappearing into the gloom ahead. Drip, drip, drip. Water leaked from the ceiling, echoing in the vast emptiness. They walked for 10 minutes. The tunnel slanted downward. Silas kept his eyes moving, scanning every corner, every alcove. Uncle, Elin tugged his hand. What? Do you hear that? Silas stopped. He held his breath. At first, silence. Then, a sound. Clink, scrape. It sounded like metal hitting stone. Rhythmic, slow, tired. Clink, scrape. Miners? Silas whispered, more to himself than her. Impossible. This place has been dead for 50 years. It sounds sad, Elin said. She wasn't looking ahead. She was looking at the walls. The rock walls were not empty. In the flickering torchlight, Silas noticed veins of silver or glinting. But there was something else. Shadows. Not the shadows cast by Silas and Elin. These shadows were detached. They were elongated, distorted shapes painted on the rock walls. They looked like men hunched over, swinging invisible pickaxes. And they were moving. Silas felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He swung the torch toward the wall. Back, he ordered, pulling Elin behind him. The shadows on the wall stopped their work. Slowly, the two-dimensional shapes turned their heads to look at the intruders. They peeled away from the rock. It was a sickening sight. Like oil separating from water, the darkness detached itself from the stone, stepping into the three-dimensional world. They formed three figures. Vaguely human but made of swirling, translucent smoke. Their eyes were hollow voids of absolute nothingness. Clink, scrape. The sound now came from their very forms, a ghostly echo of their eternal labor. Stay back. Silas roared, waving the torch. The shadows hissed, a sound like steam escaping a vent. They didn't fear the fire. They seemed drawn to it, drawn to the life of it. One of the shadows lunged. It moved with unnatural speed, a blur of smoke. Silas swung his sword. A perfect, horizontal cut that would have beheaded a man. The blade passed harmlessly through the smoke. No resistance. Only a layer of frost forming instantly on the steel. Cold? Silas gasped. The cold shot up his arm, numbing his fingers. The shadow swiped at him. Its smoky hand passed through Silas's leather armor and touched his ribs. It didn't cut. It drained. Silas felt the heat being ripped from his body. His knees buckled. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, heavy and suffocating. Physical weapons are useless, Silas realized with horror. They aren't flesh. The other two shadows advanced. They were hungry. Not for meat but for warmth. For the spark of life they had lost in the dark. Uncle. Elin screamed. She grabbed the pouch at Silas's belt. The pouch Oryn had given them. Salt, she yelled. Mr. Oryn said salt. Silas's vision was blurring. He was freezing from the inside out. He couldn't feel his sword hand. Do it, he choked out. Elin ripped the pouch open. She didn't throw it. She poured a line of white crystals onto the ground between them and the monsters. The shadow that had touched Silas recoiled as if burned. Where the salt touched the smoky feet of the entity, the darkness boiled and evaporated. Circle. Silas gasped, dropping to one knee. Make a circle. Elin scrambled, pouring the salt in a wide arc around them, sealing them against the tunnel wall. She closed the loop just as the second shadow reached for her. The monster slammed into the invisible barrier created by the salt line. Crack. A sound like lightning striking dry wood. A flash of blue light erupted from the salt. The shadow shrieked, a sound of pure, digitized static, and dissolved into mist. The other two shadows backed away, chittering in fear. They circled the salt barrier, their hollow eyes fixed on the two shivering humans inside. Silas breathed heavily, rubbing warmth back into his frozen chest. He looked at the line of salt. A simple mineral. A purity that repelled the corruption. "They're trapped," Silas whispered. "Or we are." Elin looked at the remaining shadows. She didn't look afraid anymore. She looked pitying. "They are hungry," she said. "They are looking for gold. They're looking for our souls, kid." "No," Elin pointed. "Look at their chests." Silas squinted. Inside the swirling smoke of the entities, right where a heart should be, there was a faint golden glimmer. They swallowed it, Silas realized. The legend of the outpost. The miners didn't die of a cave-in. They died because they found something they shouldn't have, and they refused to leave it. They swallowed the gold to hide it. "Greed," Silas murmured. "Greed kept them here. They aren't ghosts. They are echoes of hunger." He looked at his torch. It was burning low. If the light went out, the shadows might grow bolder. Salt or no salt, darkness was their domain. "We can't stay here," Silas said. "We have to move the circle." "How?" Silas looked at the salt on the ground. "We walk," he said. "You pour. I guard. We make a moving wall." He stood up, forcing his numb limbs to obey. Elin grabbed the salt. "Pour a path. Just a thin line in front of us. Don't break the connection to the circle until the new line is formed." It was a slow, agonizing process. Step by step, Elin trickled the white grains, extending their sanctuary inch by inch down the tunnel. Silas walked backward, torch in one hand, sword in the other. Though he knew it was useless, it made him feel better, staring down the hissing shadows that trailed them. They walked for what felt like hours. Finally, a draft of fresh air hit Silas's back. The exit. They reached the end of the tunnel. The opening was boarded up with rotting planks, but daylight streamed through the gaps. Silas kicked the planks. They shattered. They tumbled out into the snow, into the blinding light of day. Inside the tunnel, the shadows shrieked as the sunlight hit the threshold. They could not cross. They dissolved back into the walls, becoming lifeless stains of soot once more. Silas collapsed in the snow, laughing. A ragged, hysterical laugh. "Salt," he wheezed. "A bag of salt saved us. I'll never complain about a bland meal again." Elin sat beside him, dusting the last grains from her hands. She looked back at the dark tunnel. "They will be hungry forever, won't they?" she asked sadly. "Until the mountain falls." Silas sat up, looking at the mine. "That's the price of eating gold, kid. It never digests. It just weighs you down." He stood up and offered a hand to Elin. "Let's go. We're through the pass. The south is waiting." As they walked away, Silas touched the spot on his chest where the shadow had touched him. It was still cold. A reminder that there are things in this world that steel cannot kill, and that the darkest monsters are often the ones we create ourselves. The transition was not gradual. It was violent in its beauty. One moment, they were trudging through the monochromatic world of gray rock and white snow. The next, they rounded a jagged spur of the Serpent's back and the world fell away beneath them, revealing the southern valley. It hit Elin like a physical blow. She stopped dead, her small boots skidding on the gravel. Green. An ocean of green. Rolling hills of emerald grass, dense forests of oak and maple that hadn't been stripped by the northern winds, and winding rivers that sparkled like veins of liquid silver in the afternoon sun. After weeks of dead woods, rotting swamps, and freezing peaks, the vibrancy of life here was almost aggressive. "Is this heaven?" Elin whispered, clutching the salt pouch Oryn had given her as if it were a holy relic. "It's the Duchy of Ethelgard," Silas grunted, shielding his eyes from the glare. He didn't look impressed. He looked suspicious. "It's warmer, yes. But don't let the pretty grass fool you. The laws here are tighter than a hangman's noose." Silas scanned the horizon. He saw smoke rising from chimneys, not the desperate smoke of survival but the steady industrial smoke of hearths and forges. He saw roads. Paved roads. "Put your hood up," Silas ordered, adjusting his own cloak to hide the hilt of his sword. "We are not refugees anymore. We are travelers. Walk like you have a destination even if you don't." They began the descent. The air grew thicker, richer, filled with the scent of pine resin and thawing mud. By the time they reached the foothills, the sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in strokes of apricot and violet. They came across a dirt road, the old King's Road, that wound its way toward the distant city. Parked on the side of the road was a wagon. It was a colorful, garish thing, painted in peeling reds and yellows, looking like a bruised fruit against the landscape. One of its wheels had shattered, the spokes splintered under the weight of the cargo. A man was struggling with a jack, cursing fluently in a dialect Silas recognized as Southern trader cant. He was round, red-faced, and wore a velvet coat that had seen better days. Silas signaled Elin to stop. "We go around," Silas whispered. "Don't make eye contact." But the traitor had already spotted them. "Ho there." The man waved a greasy handkerchief. "You, big fellow. You look like you could lift an ox. Care to lend a hand?" Silas kept walking, his face set in stone. "I can pay," the traitor shouted. "Silver? Or food? Or wine?" Silas stopped. He looked at Elin. She was swaying on her feet. The adrenaline of the mine had faded, leaving her famished. They were out of bread. Oryn's dried meat was gone. Silas sighed, the sound of a man resigning himself to a nuisance. "Wait here," he told Elin. He walked over to the wagon. The traitor looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. Up close, Silas saw the man's eyes, shrewd, calculating, but not cruel. The eyes of a man who measured the world in profit margins. "Wheels busted," the traitor said, kicking the rim. "I have a spare, but I can't lift the axle alone. My mule is as useless as a wooden leg." "What's in the wagon?" Silas asked, his voice low. "Glass," the traitor lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Mirrors. From the Eastern Isles. Fragile as a maiden's heart and twice as expensive. That's why I can't just dump the load. Mirrors. A luxury item. I lift. You pay," Silas said. "Food. Not coin. Done. I have a ham that's only slightly dry." Silas didn't waste time on pleasantries. He wedged his shoulder under the corner of the heavy wagon. He planted his feet in the mud. He didn't use technique. He used brute force, channeling the anger and exhaustion of the last 3 days into a single heave. Groan. The wagon lifted. Wood creaked ominously. Quickly, Silas gritted out, veins bulging on his neck. The traitor scrambled, sliding the broken wheel off and jamming the spare onto the axle. He hammered the linchpin in place. Down. Silas lowered the wagon. It settled with a thud. The traitor let out a breath of relief. "By the saints, you're strong. You have the back of a siege engine." He climbed into the driver's seat and rummaged around, producing a heavy cloth-wrapped bundle. A ham, a loaf of white bread, a luxury Elin had never seen, and a skin of wine. "A deal is a deal." The traitor tossed them to Silas. Silas caught them. He turned to leave. "Wait," the traitor called out. He looked past Silas at the small figure of Elin huddled by the tree-line. "The girl. She needs a coat." Silas stiffened. "She's fine." "She's wearing rags, friend," the traitor said, his voice losing its salesmanship edge and becoming strangely soft. "And we are entering Ethelgard. In Ethelgard, people judge you by your fabric. If she walks into town looking like a beggar, the guards will harass her." He reached back into his wagon and pulled out a cloak. It wasn't new, it was a patchwork of wool and dyed cotton, a traveler's cloak, but it was thick and colorful. "Take it," the traitor said. "Call it a bonus. I don't like seeing children shiver. Bad for business. Makes the customers sad." Silas looked at the cloak. He looked at the traitor. "Why?" Silas asked. "You don't know us." "I know the look of someone running from the north," the traitor said quietly. He pointed to his own face. "I don't ask what you're running from. War, famine, or the law. It's all the same price in the end." He tossed the cloak. Silas caught it. "Safe travels, big man," the traitor flicked the reins. "And tell the girl, red brings out the color in her cheeks." The wagon trundled away, the sound of rattling glass fading down the road. Silas walked back to Elin. He draped the colorful cloak over her shoulders. It was too big, dragging on the ground, but it was warm. "It smells like lavender," Elin sniffed the fabric, her eyes wide. "It smells like charity," Silas grumbled, sitting on a log and carving the ham. "Eat." They ate by the side of the road. The white bread was soft as a cloud. The ham was salty and rich. It was the first time in weeks they had eaten something that didn't taste of ash or desperation. After eating, Elin wandered over to a small stream nearby to wash the mud from her face. Silas watched her. He felt a strange unease. In the mountains, amidst the monsters, he knew what to do. Protect. Kill. Survive. But here? In the soft light with full bellies? He felt useless. He felt exposed. "Uncle." Elin called out. Her voice was sharp, panicked. Silas was on his feet instantly, sword halfway out. "What?" Elin was standing by the stream, staring down at something in the grass. Silas rushed over. It wasn't a snake. It wasn't a trap. It was a shard of mirror. It must have fallen from the trader's wagon when it hit a bump. A jagged piece of silvered glass, lying in the green grass. Elin was staring into it. She was trembling. She raised her hands to her face, touching her cheeks, her eyes. "Is that me?" she whispered. Silas realized with a jolt that she had probably never seen a clear reflection of herself. In the slums of the north there were no mirrors, only muddy puddles. Elin looked at the reflection. She saw the dirt. She saw the tangled hair. But mostly she saw the eyes. 2 black holes in a pale, thin face. "I look like a monster," she said, her voice breaking. The purifier was right. I look like something that crawled out of a hole. She picked up a stone, ready to smash the mirror shard. "Stop," Silas said. He knelt beside her. He took the stone from her hand and tossed it away. He picked up the mirror shard. He held it up, but he angled it. "Look," Silas said. He positioned the mirror so it reflected not just her eyes, but the whole scene. It showed her face, yes, but it also showed the blue sky behind her. It showed the green trees. And it showed Silas's face next to hers, scarred, bearded, ugly, but protective. "A mirror only shows you the surface," Silas said softly. "It shows you the shell. It doesn't show you the girl who saved a fox. It doesn't show you the girl who shared her bread with a soldier who hated her. It doesn't show you the girl who saved my life with a bag of salt." Elin stared at the glass. "But my eyes." "Your eyes are just windows, Elin," Silas said. "If people look into them and see darkness, that is because they are bringing their own darkness with them. They are seeing their own fear reflected back." He tilted the mirror so the sun caught it, sending a blinding beam of light dancing across the meadow. "Look at that light," Silas said. "The glass isn't creating it. It's just reflecting the sun. You're the same. You reflect what is around you. So if I am around good things..." Elin trailed off. "Then you will shine," Silas finished. "But if you are around monsters, you will reflect them too." He put the mirror shard into her pocket. "Keep it. Not to look at your face, but to remember that you can hold the sky in your pocket." Elin touched her pocket. She looked up at Silas. "You are ugly too, uncle," she said innocently. Silas barked a laugh, a sound that surprised even him. It was a rusty and used sound. He said, standing up. "I've earned every scar. Ugliness is just a map of survival, kid. Never be ashamed of it." He looked down the road toward the distant spires of the city of Ethelgard. "Come on. We have a new cloak. Let's go see if we can fool the world for a little longer." They walked onto the paved road. Elin pulled the colorful cloak tight, hiding her ragged clothes, hiding her nature. She walked with her head a little higher. She wasn't just a cursed child running from the fire anymore. She was a traveler. She had a piece of the sky in her pocket, and a guardian who told her that ugliness was a badge of honor. The southern valley was beautiful, yes. But Silas knew that beneath the flowers the soil was still eating the dead, and they would have to be careful not to become the meal.